Scott Horton, it's amazing to be here with you again.
Hi, Jeff. How are you?
Everything's good. It's so amazing to meet up with you. I love talking to you about this stuff. It helps me in reality, to actually be in your presence. So thank you.
Well, whatever. Yeah, good to see you again, too, man. Nice tie.
What?
Nice tie.
Oh, you like my tie?
Yeah, it's Bruins colors. My dad was a Bruin, so I was kind of raised brainwashed on blue and gold.
I've had this weird experience with this tie. Ever since I put it on this morning, people have been coming up to me going, "Hey, that tie is my favorite sports team X." And I don't even know what these things are.
There you go.
Yeah, so all day it's been like, oh, that's like the, I don't know, whatever it's.
You had no idea that the football connection here, but it's a very important one to the people it's important to, I promise.
Yeah, but I don't know if it's just football. It seems like, virtually everything, like, hockey or track or, soccer or beach volleyball. I mean, like every team has a color. And so when I wear a tie like this, I elicit these comments. Oh, that's just like, the Mosquitoes, my favorite, beach volleyball team or whatever.
That's funny.
Yeah, it never stopped. So listen, I'm glad to be with you so I can, I mean, is it okay if we talk about the Trans-Pacific, partnership?
Yes, absolutely. I've been dying to figure out and too lazy to look it up. Who's the best libertarian on this TPP thing? Who do I talk to about this? Because, of course, I want more trade. We all want more trade, but none of us want to be shills for a bunch of fascists either. And so we got to oppose it. I don't know what's in there, but it must be horrible. But I don't know what's in it. So tell me.
You don't even have to look this up, right? I mean, your instincts are good enough so you know what's what.
Yeah, must be evil. It's negotiated by the U.S. government.
Of course. I mean, so the U.S. government supports it. All the corporate oligarchs are behind it. Mm-hmm. There's a great sense of intimidation behind anybody who opposes it. And you're called an isolationist and a reactionary and not modern unless you're in favor of it. And if you're in favor of it, then you're said to be in favor of progress and economic prosperity and yada, yada, right? But I mean, it's always the same nonsense. This is now probably my fifth iteration of these kind of ridiculous debates, right? So it went on with NAFTA. We were told that was free trade, and you better support it if you support free trade. But then you actually look at the details of the thing, and it's just a big, regional managed trade racket, And it was the same thing with the WTO, and so on it goes. And this is just the newest iteration of the expansion of the U.S. empire abroad to push U.S. Cartelist corporate interests. I mean, the very heart of this trade treaty, which is, by the way, it's a secret treaty, right? So nobody's ever
leaked to WikiLeaks, right?
Yeah. So you get some of it on WikiLeaks or whatever, and what you can see is terrible. But all the rest of it, we're supposed to just take the elite's word for it. This is free trade. This is Cobden and Bright. This is Adam Smith. This is global progress.
Oftentimes, I mean, the WTO does regulate in favor of freer trade a lot of the time, right? You can't deny that.
Well, none of these things are unadulterated evil, right? I mean, and generally, I mean, it's not as if the corporate elites are wrong 100% of the time. I mean, they're not. I mean, this is not like the devil on earth, right? I mean, so they're generally in favor of profitability and in a sense slightly lower trade barriers, but they have other forms of
strings come attached, right? So what are the strings? How is it that they manage this trade to
let's just be really clear about what the number one string is. And the number one string is this thing called intellectual property. This thing we call intellectual property, which has been the great bane of capitalist experience for like 250 years. Like every time some great new innovation comes along, some corporate shill wants to own it and codify it and deny its access to the rest of the world, prolong the period of first mover profitability, and exploit essentially everybody else who wants to copy the good idea, and loot and control and have monopoly profits. It's been going on for hundreds of years. and it's still going on today. So if you look at the Trans-Pacific Partnership, intellectual property is like the number one point. And so what does this mean in practice? I mean, this is a great boon to the pharmaceutical industry, which means basically protecting their bottom line at the expense of health for the poor around the world. And yeah,
let me ask you something. Let me ask something here, because I know this is a specialty of yours, and inside the libertarian movement, this is kind of a thing that people have been talking about for I don't know how long exactly, but I think the average businessman probably hears opposition to intellectual property, and their reaction is, well, come on, without copyrights and patents, why the hell am I going to go to work at all? Who the hell's going to invest in research and development if Jeff Tucker's just going to run away with their widget the day after tomorrow? So what's the answer to that?
This is proof that you've been hanging around a libertarian world too long. I mean, that's what libertarians say, right? Because most people, libertarians, live in an abstract.
Well, I was actually thinking of a Democrat that I know. But who's a businessman, right? Not like he's not a socialist. He's
like an actual businessman opposes. I mean, because
the idea being that so much goes into research and development that if you're not guaranteed a profit for a time or this kind of kickback for a time, it's sort of like what the socialists accuse us, that you have to have a socialist security force in order to have private property at all. And of course, libertarians dispute that. But so you dispute that. Well, for example, IBM comes up with some fancy new software to run their machines. You say they ought to have to share with everyone, or what? What is it?
Yeah, I say they should have to share it with everybody. Absolutely. We should have socialism, communism, and ideas, and capitalism, and all things that are relevant to private property. But common goods and ideas and innovations and recipes, those are common goods. That's why we need communism. So yeah, and by the way, the average businessman is completely exploited and destroyed by the existence of patents and copyrights and trademarks. So I mean, basically, it's the elites that benefit from intellectual property, the elites that are deeply connected with the state, and it's not the creators. It's the oligarchs. It's the large-scale corporations, and they're the ones supporting the Trans-Pacific Partnership precisely because it's exploitative of the globe.
Wait, now hold the TPP thing for a second, because I want to get back to just copyrights in general. Okay. I think we all kind of have grown up with folktales, haven't we? Of suppressed inventions where some guy came up with a brilliant solution to a problem of whatever manufacturing or distribution, and the big guys who were already the big guys ended up buying them out, and instead of developing the technology, locked it away from the people. And maybe some of those stories are hogwash, right? Perpetual motion machines and whatever the hell. But I think we also hear about whatever kind of water engines that run on hydrogen and this and that and whatever things. Who knows what kind of inventions have been suppressed by the people who were already there. And it's funny because I think everybody sort of has the impression that that's how it works, but we still think we need it, right? We still think that the state has.
No, it's a scam. I mean, intellectual property has always been a scam. It was a scam of the corporate big shots, in the 18th century and England and the United States. And in terms of copyright, it's always been a tool of censorship and the large scale publishers trying to crush the private publishers. It's always the same thing. It's a tool of the ruling class, and that's all it is now, and it's all it's ever been. This never helps small business. I mean, what actually happens is that small, because the cartelists. By the way, I was looking at the history of the telegraph today, and it turns out, like every innovation in the last couple hundred years, every new innovation that these jerks, first they're innovators and they're like amazing, and then they go to the government and try to protect their innovation against copying. So we were slowed down in telegraph technology for like 60 years because of idiotic disputes over patents. It's just egregious when you look back. Can you imagine? I mean, it seems stupid to us now, but every big shot was trying to control dots and dashes and claim they owned it, and thereby it was a long process of forestalling the advance of telegraphic technology for like 50 years. I mean, the damn thing was invented like 1830. It didn't become mainstream until the 1860s, or 70s, and even later. I mean, the whole thing was ridiculous, and it was just a pillaging that was taking place, and all the innovators in the field spent more money trying to protect their monopolies than they did spend, like actually innovating and improving the technology. Same thing is going on now, in the digital space and smartphones. But these trade agreements are an attempt to internationalize this and to stop progress and to pillage everybody on behalf of those who are benefiting from the first movers in the market.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
and so,
but here's the other thing, Scott, to remember. There would never be any such thing as intellectual property without a state. I mean, it's the state that creates the shit.
Without this giant treaty, right?
Yeah, and so this is just like an internationalization of the state. You know what I resent most about it, though, Scott? I mean, it's just, and I know you feel the same way, and you feel this frustration every day. That we have these sort of weird artificial ideological divisions, like we have the socialists on the left, and we have like the capitalists on the right, and they caricature us, and we caricature them, and it's all a big fun game. But and on this subject of intellectual property, the left is 100% correct. Like everything they say about these kind of trade agreements is totally right. They're completely correct that it's a scam. It's large scale corporations paying off the government to create cartels that exploit the poor around the world. That's 100% right. Yeah. But it causes them to hate capitalism. Well, to my mind, a true free market would not look like this.
What they need to do is hate capitalists, because they're the ones bribing off the government to act like a fascist and go ahead and fix their price. And I think, you're absolutely right. Left, right, or anybody else, you take ma and pa in any living room in America and ask them what they think about Americans pay X times the amount for drugs than Canadians do for the same damn pill. And people got to smuggle it across the border and this, that, and who knows what in order to take medicine. I mean, obviously it's crazy.
Well, that this was a big part of what the Silk Road did, right? I mean, the Silk Road, people would buy medicines in Canada and sell
not just heroin, medicine, prescription drugs. You're saying legitimate ones?
Yeah, real prescription drugs that are approved in Mexico and Canada. This is what the Silk Road did. They weren't approved by the FDA here, so people would buy the drugs in Montreal or whatever, sell them to people in Manhattan. That was the whole thing. I mean, that was a lot of what the business of Silk Road did. Yeah. This is not criminal narcotics distribution. This is distribution of patented, approved medication that people desperately needed.
Oh yeah, well, the judge made it clear that she was pointing to drug dealing as the lawlessness, but she made it real clear that it was the establishment of the site itself in her little soliloquy there, that it was the flouting of the rules that was just going to absolutely not be tolerated here. That you think that you can do this? Oh no, you can't. Life in prison without parole.
No, this was she had a political philosophy, and the political philosophy was essentially Rousseauian. The community has laid down these laws, and if you think you're outside of that, you're gonna be burned at the stake.
No man.
It was a positively Renaissance, or I should say medieval theory. I mean,
his plea, he said, come on, please give me my golden years, when let me be 65, 70 out of prison someday kind of thing. I know you're going to take the rest of the middle part of my life, but she said, no way. You're going to die in there, dude. And in federal prison, there's no parole. You do the entire sentence. That's it. So.
Yeah, you shouldn't have brought it to the subject because it upsets me terribly. I adore Ross, and I pray for him. I mean, it's egregious what happened to him. Not to mention the fact that the main substance sold on Silk Road was pot. Back before it was legal in most American cities, which it is now. And that was only 4 years ago or whatever.
Yeah. So listen, as long as we're talking about the TPP and all of this, well, actually, first of all, before we get to the broader imperial question here, Obama says in the TPP, hey, listen, Congress, you got to do what I say on this thing. Give me fast track and let me do this thing, because if we don't write the rules, then the Chinese will. So, and this is going to go to my next question for you too, but what difference does it make What exactly are these rules, and how are they so bent toward American cronies versus Chinese ones that it's going to hurt Americans or hurt any specific consortium in America or what?
Yeah, I want the Chinese. I mean, what Obama's really warning about, I want to happen. Actually, the Chinese are much better on the subject than Americans. So if we're going to have any rule writers, it should be the Chinese, not the Americans.
You're talking about the Chinese Communist Politburo. They're the free market guys here.
They're much better than Americans. They're not free market, but they're much better. I mean, the American cartel. I mean, look, America is a dying empire ruled by a bunch of ruling class cartelists, who are trying to use the state to benefit themselves and extend their empire around the world. I mean, that's the whole thing. But at least in China, you have some, scrappy young entrepreneurs who are not as, thoroughly corrupt as the American ruling class. So, no, I mean, what Obama's warning about, let me ask you this, Scott, do you remember the NAFTA debates at all? Or you were like,
yeah, sure.
You do?
Yeah, in the early 90s. Yeah, and how they passed it through a lame duck Congress and they made it a simple majority in both houses instead of a treaty with a supermajority in the Senate.
Right. Mm-hmm. So it's always the same thing. Like the political culture just shifts dramatically. And, anybody who's against this is considered to be like an enemy of the state. And if you're at all intelligent or respectable or responsible, you're for it. And the atmosphere.
I remember Rush Limbaugh on the Rush Limbaugh TV show. He had a graphic of Al Gore with boxing gloves on, knocking Ross Perot out. And it was Rush Limbaugh going, yeah, Al Gore whoop Ross Perot in the pro-NAFTA in the debate on Larry King. Al Gore is 100% right. And I remember thinking, bipartisanship is always,
that's right.
I'm a George Carlinian on that.
That's right.
Just means you're going to get it twice as hard. It doesn't mean anything
it's always the same thing.
Again.
And there's, and Scott, there's a weird thing that happens in American politics. Like a lot of the time we debate stuff. We debate welfare reform, we debate taxes, and it seems like both sides are sort of evenly matched, right? But when something is extremely important to the ruling class establishment, mm-hmm. there's a weird sense that comes over American culture. It's like everybody must agree, and if you disagree, you're out of your minds. And it happens every once in a while. And I've maybe it's happened a half dozen times in my adult life, but it happens with like war. Like if you're against the war, then there's something like profoundly wrong with you, and you probably should be locked up. And it happens with these trade treaties too. It's like this huge bipartisanship, and every respectable voice. And what makes me just sick, and I can hardly stand it, because it just, on one hand it's heartbreaking, on the other hand it makes you deeply cynical. But to see really good economists who are otherwise seemingly intelligent people talk about the TPP or whatever, as if it's a perfect embodiment of Adam Smith style free trade, without ever having read it. This happened with the WTO. It happened with NAFTA too. The economists, who I otherwise admire and respect, just lend their voices, just like to this establishment racket, without ever having looked at the details. Maybe they do one quick Google search, and then they spin out their op-eds for the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times, which very suspiciously say identically the same thing in the course of these debates. Yeah,
and they all get paid very well. There's a famous quote from Leslie Gelb, who is the former president of the Council on Foreign Relations. In fact, he helped Ellsberg write the Pentagon Papers before Ellsberg ran off with him, and so they kind of had a divergent history after that point. You could tell. Anyway, so Gelb, I guess he's considered to be like a very center-right Democrat, right? More of a Brzezinski than a Kissinger, right? The mirror images of each other on the other side of the partisan divide. But so Gelb said his excuse for the Iraq war was basically, locker room politics, that like, hey, you got to fit in just for professional reasons. If the foreign policy establishment is coming together to gin up an attack against Iraq, then what are you going to do? Be the voice of reason? What if everybody looks at you funny? What if you don't get invited to the fancy party or get, extra, special, whatever his name is, chair at the next distinguished think tank panel or whatever the crap. And so he just came right out and said it. Yeah, that's why I helped kill 1 million Iraqis. I could have stopped him. I could have done the Iraq version of the Pentagon Papers and stopped the war. I see how that works, but no.
No, it's a little bit mysterious, and I'm always intrigued by it because most of the time in American life, you feel free to disagree, and you have some sense that there's this semblance of real debate. But when something's like overwhelmingly important, another example of this would have been
the bailouts, man.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was about to say. The bailout. That was another case. It was like, let's put aside your ideology. We don't want to hear about your purist ideas. This is a case of national emergency. We've all got to come together to support.
Right. Well, it's the same thing with the Iraq War too, where look, even Bill Clinton says that he's got all these weapons or whatever. And you could just as easily say, hey, if Bill Clinton says it, we know it's a lie, so we can forget about it. Give me a break, right? But instead, whoa, with confirmation like that, no, it's the same thing with Mike Brown. Yeah. Even Eric Holder admits that it was okay for Darren Wilson to shoot Mike Brown from more than 100 feet away after shooting at him as he ran.
Right.
Even Eric Holder says that the cop can kill the black guy if he wants to. And Eric Holder, why? He's a Democrat and a black guy. And so forget Mike Brown's corpse. Who cares about him?
Right. No, and in the end, it's a little bit funny because if you've lived through things like this, you do feel it. And it's a little bit opaque. It's not like anybody's putting a gun to your head and saying you must support, the bailout. So you must support this war. You must support this trade treaty. But if you're at all sensitive to sort of the political moment, it overwhelms you. You have a sense that if you disagree with this, you're going to be ridiculed. You're going to be written out of mainstream life. You'll never get another gig on, national television, or you can't ever run for public office or whatever. There's a weird way in which you feel, the overwhelming pressure from this sort of bipartisan ruling class impositions. It's like all respectable, responsible people know what position to take, and it's not the one that you're taking. And so this is the very definition, actually, of courage. And I don't know if I would call it courage. I mean, it's a matter of being independent-minded, essentially. And it always breaks my heart when I see libertarians who are fighting so strongly against the state in every other way, basically, go silent or, come to the defense of the establishment right when they're most needed to dissent. And I think this TPP is an example of that, just like bailouts. But I remember
that's why I don't even pay attention to things like the TPP that much. Like, I know that they're important, but I figure it's just a fait accompli, man. They want to push this thing through. They're going to do it. And who's going to stop them? Ross Perot? No. So whatever.
It's going to happen. It's going to happen. But it maybe, if enough people actually became brave and opposed it, it wouldn't happen. I mean, but
that's a cheap excuse. I'm not saying that's good enough or whatever. I should have interviewed you about this on the show over and over by now. I mean, it's hugely important.
It is hugely important. I mean, intellectual property, in the way the state conceives of the topic, is a tremendously evil, exploitative institution. I mean,
you said, it amounts to sanctions on medicine.
Yeah, and a destruction of entrepreneurship all around the world. I mean, it gives license to the U.S. empire to go and arrest, poor people. I mean, a lot of the world's economy is sustained by piracy. I mean, China, the whole Far East. I mean, probably a third of economic growth is due to so-called piracy, violations of intellectual property rights. So you pass something like these trade treaties that basically make create a sort of a globalized institution that makes it illegal.
And you're not talking about bootleg movies. You're talking about bootleg blueprints for machine tools and
everything. Yeah, it's everything. Yeah, everything from software to hardware and movies and medicines, and just, I mean, it's the whole heartbeat of the life of the global economy. Essentially traces to being very edgy on the subject of intellectual property. I mean, if the American corporate cartel had its way, they would profit massively, and the entire global economy would sink into global depression, essentially.
All right. Well, so now let me ask you this: is there a chance you got a chance to read that article that I sent you in the email today, but the Alfred McCoy piece that we ran on antiwar.com about the empire, the American Great Game? Did you see that?
No, I'm tragically I didn't. Why don't you just tell me about it? Well,
I'd be willing to bet you're familiar with Halford Mackinder, the British imperialist, and his theory of geopolitics and Eurasia and Africa being the world island, and how England must run it from the rim periphery and all of this and that, drive a wedge between Russia and China and all this, and how he goes on to say that really the containment strategy of the Cold War was actually still that same strategy dressed up as anti-communism. But it's basically an attempt by, after all, first the English, who live on a little island offshore of Europe, right? And then the Americans to rule the old world, which is, I think he correctly calls it the world island. It's most of Earth, most of the landmass is Eurasia, of course. And all of those people and what have you. So anyway, the point of this thing is this. Alfred McCoy, who's a great historian, author of The Politics of Heroin and A Question of Torture and all of these, very important books, is saying that, listen, the thing is the Americans more or less have blown it, and the Chinese have a plan to counteract our empire. And basically their plan is to just lay down as many rail lines and as many gas lines from China headed west as they possibly can, all the way to Spain, and just completely integrate the landmass with distribution systems, basically planes, trains, and automobiles, right? In a way that, I guess he does say, gives them access to the Indian Ocean and all of that in a way that could limit American naval power. I'm not so sure about all that, but he's basically saying that they have a plan for more or less kicking American hegemony out of Eurasia. And then I'm getting to the point. He seemed to think that it mattered, like, for the average American. And I wasn't sure, again, he's no imperialist, right? He's just saying, I just think maybe he accepted a false premise, what the politicians would have us all believe, that without this empire, we'd go broke. And he mentioned specifically, Jeff, he wasn't just saying, cheap labor or something kind of off the cuff, which obviously we waste way more than we make in profit off of cheap labor, I would say, just guessing anyway. But he was talking about exporting inflationary dollars, and how with the dollar as the reserve currency of the world, the government has put the American people in the position where we've been basically living on the cheap and getting away with bloody murder and buying goods that are artificially cheap with artificially depreciating dollars all this time. And that when the end comes to that, and this is what we talked about on the show before, where you talked about, told us about China's new IMF that they're creating, and even all our European allies going and joining up with this new system to undercut American dollar hegemony. And anyway, the point being, McCoy thinks that the American people have a lot to lose here, that when this all comes unraveled, it's going to be that kind of global depression like you were just describing. Well, it seemed to me like the biggest threat to the dollar is all the money we waste on the empire trying to rule the old world from the center of North America. And that's what's breaking the dollar, is all the deficit spending on all the killing in the first place. So, but I mean, I want to know what you think about all.
The U.S. could create a robust economy to withstand any kind of, you want to call it an attack, from abroad, very, very easily. But it's going to require massive political restructuring. It's going to require, massive reduction or elimination of the capital gains tax that could solve so much, just instantly. Corporate taxes, income taxes, regulations. Pulling away from the American empire, create a Hong Kong out of the whole of the U.S., And all these so-called threats just to the American people just vanish instantly, essentially. I mean, if we want to try to maintain a certain current level of big government policies and the status quo, we're going to see real reductions in the American standard of living in the future. I have no doubt about that. But the pressure for political reform is going to intensify, and we're at a crossroads. It's like, do we want to be a free country or not? That's really what it comes down to.
Yeah. All right. But so if the states of the world quit trading in dollars, quit buying oil in dollars, give up on American currency, and decide that they want to run with a China-dominated global economy instead, does that mean that we all go broke? The American people? I mean, assuming they don't cut the capital gains tax or whatever. What you're saying is it doesn't matter if America has hegemony in the old world at all?
Well, I'm just saying that if that does happen, it's not going to be China's fault. It's going to be our own ruling class and government policies. I mean, we can overcome this. We can integrate ourselves into a global economy. I mean, basically, Americans need to get over this idea of the nation state, and a U.S. number one, because it's truly unsustainable in a digital world in which borders are being erased, and things are getting worse. I mean,
in other words, we're not fighting. Our politicians are not fighting over national wealth. They're fighting over political power for themselves. But it's not for us, so that we can get cheaper gas, whatever. And I guess we do benefit from exporting depreciating dollars somewhat, right?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, we can't overcome a lack of that system.
We don't even know what it would look like to live in a world in which the dollar was not supreme, but we will someday, And I tell you something, there's something else too. We need to get used. The U.S. war on immigrants is national suicide. Yeah, it really is. And the war on immigration is as intense as the war on drugs, or the war on anything else. I mean, it's a disaster, because for a brief moment in history, which is right now, a lot of people in the world would like to come here. A lot of talent, a lot of great labor, a lot of great people. We have an opportunity, like right now, to reform the system, to invite the world in. But we're not doing it. We have exactly the opposite thing. There's a hysterical reaction against immigration that's just completely out of control. So something needs to be done about that too. And I hope. I mean, that's the kind of reform that has to come from the top, and I don't know what else to do about it.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the whole thing. Is you have the population, a great part of the population of this country, they feel really strongly about that.
Well, it's so wicked.
It's some so game cool. And I guess they don't mind so much when the foreigners that come are very highly educated and go get jobs in scientific sectors and whatever. But when you're talking about Mexican laborers coming over and moving in next door, man, people turn right into the Ku Klux Klan. I swear to God, they're just you can turn a regular person into a horrible bastard in not very long.
Well, but it's my strong impression is that over the last 10 years, ever since 9/11, the war on immigration has become, like so intense that like anybody from a foreign country faces just massive humiliation, at the border. And it's just insane. I mean, I work for the Foundation for Economic Education. We try to get people in from around the world. But getting into the U.S. is so difficult at this point. It's just crazy. I don't understand how it happened that a country that thrived off immigration, for its entire history, has turned so against immigration. I mean, talk about first world problems.
Well,
as I say, it's national suicide, economic suicide, really.
I hate to say it, but mostly, man, it's just Fox News selling commercial time. That's all it is. That commercial time is worth millions and millions and millions of dollars. And you get old white people afraid, and you separate them from the money in their pockets. It's as simple as that. They're not content to just go to the movies on Friday night and be afraid. They got to be afraid of blacks, and they got to be afraid of Muslims, and they got to be afraid of, the liberals, whoever the hell they are, right? They don't even mean Democrats. They don't even know what it means. They just, they're like the Canadians or something at our doorstep. They're whatever.
So
They're just
you're
they like
describing
being
Fox News,
terrified, and Mexicans are terrifying because when they're talking, you can't even understand what they're talking about. They're probably gonna hit you over the head.
So do you watch Fox News? That's pretty funny.
Oh yeah, no, I watch a lot of Fox News.
How do you stand it? I mean, I don't.
It's really bad. Well, I watch a lot of it on mute and read the captions. Honestly, I split the difference. You understand? I'm trying to get by in the world, but yeah, no, it's pretty bad. And hey, fear sells. It doesn't matter if their stuff never pans out. Just tune in next time, and they'll make you forget about the thing that didn't pan out last time because they got a new one ready and loaded for you.
Pure propaganda. But do you watch Fox more than you watch MSNBC?
Yeah. And in fact, what's funny is I've been watching a little bit of Al Jazeera now. I have it on my local AT&T here.
Get some objective news.
They're no better or whatever. It's just Qatari propaganda and all that. But the only thing that I've learned from it is just to watch how interesting it is to watch serious adults do news, right? It's not like they're very serious or anything. It's just adults doing news, as opposed to MSNBC and Fox, which is just pure showmanship the whole damn time. You know what I mean? Has nothing to do with journalism whatsoever. And these guys are like, well, here's a report by Dave about a thing that happened. And then Dave files his report. It doesn't even matter if it's an important subject. I'm not saying they're being very edgy and covering things they're not supposed to. Nothing even like that. But just being adults and doing the news is so much different than what you're used to on cable TV in America right now. It's really something to behold, actually, the contrast. It reminds you of an older time or something,
Well, I just wish that people would understand that news is in this country is entertainment. I mean, it's just all about getting viewers,
entertaining.
Yeah, and it's not, and they only pretend to sort of care about the well-being of the country and stuff like that. It's all just it's all a charade, really. Now, are you following the Republican nomination at all? The struggle for the nomination? Or are you just so uninterested that it's just?
Oh yeah, no, I'm obsessed with politics.
No, are you really?
So I'm obsessed with Rand Paul because I'm so disappointed in him. He drives me up the wall. And
I know this about you.
And then he does good things sometimes, which just goes to show why I'm so frustrated with him, because I know he knows better when he does all the horrible things that he does. And let's get this straight. He's crossed the line on extremely important things. Iran, Israel, Palestine, the war against the Islamic State, military spending. I mean, we're not, when Ron ran, he said, listen, I say abolish the empire and spend that money shoring up the deficit in Medicaid. Right? Like, I'm not for that. I'm against Medicaid. And I know Ron Paul is too. But he's saying, look, how about we compromise? We stop all the mass murder and spend a little bit more on pills for grandma. Is that a fair compromise? Rand is saying, man, we're going to have to cut this social spending so that we can afford to shore up the empire. And that's not okay. It's not okay at all. And then he turns around and he goes, hey, look at me. I'm Mr. Constitution on the Patriot Act. Why? Did I ever tell you about that time that James Madison made a point about the limits of power? And it's like, you bastard, man. Who the hell are you anyway? Or, we know who he is. But why not just – and here's the thing about it too, is all of this is about appeasing Israel's fifth column in America. I don't know why people are afraid to just talk about this. The neoconservatives and the Israel lobby represent the interests of a foreign power. And the neoconservatives dominate the brains of every single Republican apparatchik in this entire society. And they say exactly what they're supposed to say. And no matter how much Rand Paul tries to suck up to Israel and their fifth column in America, everybody knows he's Ron Paul's son. And so they still hate him anyway. It's like
they
trying
hate
to
him
appease
anyway,
the Nazis. It gets him absolutely nowhere. And all it does is it makes everybody who loves his dad and wants so badly to support him say, listen, I can't trust this guy whatsoever. If he's going to flip-flop around to please Sheldon Adelson, the casino magnate, then I don't want nothing to do with him, man. He's filthy.
I don't understand Adelson, really. I mean, that's a weird thing. But does it not make you a little bit sympathetic when you see the neocons, railing against Rand?
Well, it just makes me madder. Okay, I'll tell you a story. Stop me if I told you this one already.
That's fine. Yeah.
So Rand, he got in trouble because right after he announced he was running, he was short with a couple of female interviewers who accused him of flip-flopping, which of course he had flip-flopped, going from, come on, Iran's not a threat, to, oh, Iran is a threat because that's what Sheldon Adelson and the Israel lobby want me to say, which was pathetic. And when they called him out, he tried to call them liars and pretend like that never happened and that he never said the things that we can all Google and know that he said, because he's such an idiot. That's the other thing I don't like about him. His father's such a kind gentleman. You just want to hug him. And Rand seems like the kind of guy who would be very short with his waitress and is very stuck up and, you know, wraps his sweater around when he plays tennis and is a real prick. You know, like the bad guy on Caddyshack 2 or something, kind of a guy, you know? I just don't like him. And anyway, so, shit. See, I lost my train of thought.
I know. That was a good soliloquy, though. I mean,
it was the flip flopping on Iran and whatever. Right. What did I say? I have no idea, Jeff, where the hell I was.
No, you were talking about his interviews with these women.
Oh, the interviews with the women. I was telling an anecdote. The interviews with the women. So now the idiots, the PC police, said, oh, he's a sexist and he's picking on these women because he hates women. Okay, so that's stupid, right? I'm only talking about that part of the story because that explains why he went on Megyn Kelly, because she was going to let him off the hook. Look at me, I'm a woman and I say he's okay, was Megyn Kelly's line, you know, helping him out, rehabilitating Rand, the man, for just a minute, okay? That was why she had him on. But while he was there, she hit him with Charles Krauthammer, the notorious neoconservative, wrong about everything ever since he was a speechwriter for Walter Mondale, the former Trotskyite commie rat. And anyway, so Krauthammer said, well, Rand Paul's a sissy. Rand Paul is a Democrat. Rand Paul isn't tough enough. Rand Paul is like Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama.
Mean, you've seen these attacks, right? I mean, the Washington Post.
So now the story gets good right here.
Conservatives isn't going against Rand Paul every day, right?
Right. But so here's where the story gets good, is he's still that thin-skinned, right? He's not a sexist. He goes out after Krauthammer the same way he went after those women, right? He's very thin-skinned. And so, but instead of pandering and laying down on his belly and saying, oh, no, I swear I hate Iran just as much as you want me to, Charles Krauthammer, like he usually does, he didn't know what to say. So he resorted to telling the truth. And he said, oh, yeah, well, Krauthammer sided with Obama and Hillary on support for the rebels in Libya and in Syria. And look what that got us. A bunch of Al-Qaeda spread like disease all over North Africa.
He's telling the truth.
Right. So under pressure from a horrible neocon, he lashed out, forgot his talking points, pandering and crawling before Israel, and went ahead and said what he wanted to say, which was he was good on that. When they wanted to support Al-Qaeda in Libya, he said we shouldn't. And they insisted, and the neocons and Obama did it. And when he said we shouldn't support Al-Qaeda in Syria, they insisted, and the neocons and Obama did it. So now they want to accuse him of being like Obama, and then he turns it right around. You're like Obama, only worse. Your only problem with Obama is he wasn't even as evil as you. So now this is a Rand Paul that can actually get work done. This is a Rand Paul that if he goes out there and fights for a year and a half and says, forget all this warmongering, America, follow me. I'm leading you to peace, a return to normalcy. Well, an end to the empire. We're not doing this anymore. I am not lying like FDR when I say I am not going to send your sons off to any foreign wars. And if you really want to let Charles Krauthammer decide whether your son lives or dies, then by all means vote for Marco Rubio or Jeb Bush. If you want to live in a normal country and a normal time, then vote Paul. Simple, and then win, right? He could, and the only way he could win, this is America, somewhat a little bit democratic system in a way. The only way that someone who is not the tool of the foreign lobbies and the arms industry and the big bankers, who could possibly win in a million years, would be if he did everything he could to rally the entire base of the mass of the population of this society. All non-voters and voters too. Everybody, you have to help. Bum rush the primaries. This is all of us against the war party, right? Only in a real fight could he ever dream of getting the nomination? Could he ever dream of being the president of the United States? He thinks he's going to crawl on his hands and knees and pander before Israel, and they're going to allow him to be the president? That is the dumbest damn thing I've ever heard. And so, and here's the other thing too. He's half a dilettante too. He doesn't do the work and the reading like his father does at all, but it doesn't matter. All he has to do is basically tell the truth, and he kicks their ass. They're so bad on Iran. They're bad on Israel. They're bad on Syria. They're bad on Libya. They're bad on Ukraine. They're crazy. The neocons are wrong about everything. Rand Paul ought to be able to kick their ass with one hand and no problem, like Jackie Chan, like in The Matrix, the one guy versus 100 guys. Bring on every neocon, bring on every Republican nominee. You're all wrong about everything. You're wrong about Mexico. You're wrong about Honduras. You're wrong about South Africa. You're wrong about everything. Bring it. And he won't do that. And so he's going to end up just another also ran like Rubio and the rest of these losers, like Mike Huckabee.
But what if he didn't? I mean, what if actually he has a chance? I mean, wouldn't you consider that?
Well, that's why I'm hollering, right? It's because I think he does. I think if he would learn the lesson from his victory over Krauthammer. I mean, believe me, Jeff, if you'd seen this, if Krauthammer himself had been there, it wasn't just Megyn Kelly quoting him, but Krauthammer itself had been there, Rand still would have just whooped him. Like Krauthammer didn't have nothing to say to Rand's awesome response. It was really great. Yeah. So all he had to do was be honest and tell the truth and act like his dad a little bit and just kick their ass. Turn everything they say upside down and just.
But did you see? And I'm not sure that I know the author of this piece. The Washington Post is a surprise to me, right? Because, like, I grew up at a time when it was conventionally left wing, and not just left wing, but like establishment, what they called liberal, right? Social democratic. We know the tribe, right? But ever since what's his name at Amazon took over the Washington Post, now it's becoming mixed. But of course, its foreign policy message is conventionally neoconservative. So they ran an article, I don't know, 2 weeks ago or something like this, railing against Rand Paul because Rand Paul. It was a very interesting column because he said Rand Paul has become a leftist. Do you know this line? So because
that's that Krauthammer line I'm referring to, where he's supposedly weak.
And it's not. But Scott, it's not just about U.S. foreign policy. So yeah, he's like a pacifist and isolationist. He doesn't want to.
Oh, I get it. And he's relatively good on blacks having the right to not be shot to death for walking down the street.
Well, that's right. So it goes further, right? So now suddenly the neocons are like, against him because he's reaching out to interests beyond the white bourgeoisie, basically. Which pleases me very much. I mean,
me too.
I'm very happy to see somebody talking about prison reform. No, he doesn't go anywhere near as far as he should, and on drugs, and on there's a whole series of issues that Rand Paul's frustrating because he's like better than any actual like living politician in a way, but he never says the thing you want him to say, right? But here he is actually being inclusive in a way that a real libertarian should be, and reaching out to marginalized constituencies and saying things that should be said about the policies concerning the inner city and so on, and prison reform and drug reform. And he's actually speaking so the Washington Post, of all people, of all institutions, it's hard for me to adapt to this new reality, right? Right. So the Washington Post is like blasting him as a leftist. This is the column. He's too left wing. If he were challenging Hillary for the Democratic nomination, then maybe he'd have a success. But he has no success in the Republican nomination for getting the Republican nomination because he's insufficiently racist. And
the thing is, I think it's partly true, but I think just barely, right? I mean, what that guy is really talking about is comparing him to every other Republican candidate. Well, he just doesn't fit in at all. But who says that the Republican candidates represent the voters of the Republican Party?
Well, that's what I don't know. That's what I don't know. I don't know who runs.
And I think they kind of do. I mean, it's like this, right? Is the Republicans in power certainly could talk the Republican rank and file into supporting another war, probably if they were in there. But are they going to vote for somebody because he promises them another war? I don't think so. And I think that if Rand went out there and said, listen, there's nothing conservative about world revolution, okay? There's nothing conservative about blowing our entire wad in 25 years after the end of the Cold War and laying down and dying like the USSR did. Let's knock this crap off. Your oldest son is dead now because George Bush got him killed. You're going to let Jeb kill your other son?
Right.
You know?
By the way, can I ask you a question, actually, since you mentioned this? Have we talked since the Bush, was there a autobiography that came out recently, or some biography
of W. Bush?
Yeah, of W. Yeah.
Oh, well, I think he put out his memoirs a couple of years back, but I don't know of anything.
But it seems like in the last few weeks, I heard something on NPR that there was it was a memoir of his press secretary, I think. But she was talking about how W was going through a hospital, and some mother confronted him, and said something like, "Look, your stupid war. Look what it did. Look what it did to my son. But look at your children. They're all safe and happy, and it's because you're part of the privileged elite and you're part of the ruling class. But my son had to be maimed and had his life destroyed because of your idiotic policies." And then he walked away from that scene and said to his press secretary, she was right. She was right about this. Do you not remember? Does this not ring a bell to you?
No, I hadn't heard that.
So he said, she was right about that. She's right. I had nothing to say to her. And so his press secretary is telling the story as if this is like illustrates his amazing piety and his magnificence and his magnanimity. But I heard this story, and I just heard the astonishing hypocrisy of statecraft.
Right. This is in the news today, as Donald Rumsfeld said the same thing. George Bush, he shouldn't have tried to make a democracy in Iraq. Like, that's what that war was about, making a democracy. And that was what was wrong with it, was that they tried to share any power with the people there.
Rumsfeld said this.
Rumsfeld said this just yesterday or whatever. It's in the Sunday Times or the London Times.
Yeah.
And me? Oh, I didn't have anything to do with that. I was only there for the good part. I didn't do the bad things.
Yeah, they're all trying to escape the consequences of their actions. I mean, basically, in the end, these people, they all have a mindset that they're the ruling class, they're the rulers of the state. They should never be held accountable for anything that happens under their watch. That the rulers of the empire don't have to obey normal standards of morality, and that is what is necessary for keeping the world together. If we don't have a different standard of morality for the state and its functionaries, then the world falls apart. So we're going to be courageous and embrace our own immoralism. This is the way they all believe. They all believe this. It's like with their mother's milk or something.
Right. Yeah. No, that's something that we don't talk about nearly enough, is about how, people born into power especially are taught that, yes, people will die when you make the decisions that you make, but that's just how it is, and screw them. And look, how else is the world going to turn if we're not making decisions like that, and better us than them? And that's it. And when you're in that kind of position, the kind of morality that says you don't kill people and take their things is just it's a different thing, right? It's a different species of human that doesn't apply to.
When he walked away from the hospital, what he was saying to his press secretary is, yes, she was right, if you believe in that sort of normal conventional morality. But I, on the other hand, I'm courageous and wonderful and exempt from these standards of judgment because I'm part of the state. And that makes me a little bit godlike, a little bit higher than mere mortals. And that's part of the responsibility of governing. You should always look out for that phrase. The responsibility of governing. What that is an apologia pro vita immoralism. It's like something extremely evil is about to happen, and you're going to be asked to praise it as good.
Right. Hey, let me ask you something. Yeah. You've been around certainly in the libertarian movement a bit longer than me, and I wonder if you could tell me about what amounts to, if something does amount to, a libertarian view, or what you could kind of define as a more or less, if not objective, at least consensus libertarian view on Israel and Palestine. What do you think of that issue? I guess it would be a secondary question to that.
God, Jesus. I mean, that's. I don't think that it's first of all, if you look back in the libertarian literature, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious what's going on here. I mean, you have a great deal of sympathy in the in the early part of the 20th century towards the Zionist movement, which is a cultural movement, a migration movement, a movement to preserve a history and a people, and that clashed with the Jewish movement in Europe, which is all about integration and that sort of thing. So, and a lot of it came down to upheaval in the Weimar period in Germany, really. But things, so that was the intra-Jewish struggle that occurred before World War II. But once the state of Israel was created, all bets were off. It was the hyper politicization of, and you can read about this actually in Ron Paul's book, his book Liberty Defined. The chapter on Israel actually goes through this history in a very detailed and beautiful way. The creation of the state of Israel was in many ways a gigantic public policy calamity, because it displaced people and hyper politicized what was previously a beautiful movement, at least beautiful from the point of view of cultural Jews and religious Jews. But even that, you could sort of deal with at some level. But once the Greater Israel Project came along, then you have a typical example of imperialism taking place, and that's I would say that is it depends on what you mean by libertarianism, because from an isolationist American point of view, the perspective, I think, is and should be, what happens in the Middle East is none of our business. It should be none of the U.S. government's business. But from a more abstract level, any empire is going to create disasters all around. And, as beautiful as the dream of Israel was and is, it's severely compromised by the fact that it's constantly conducted by, a kind of a ruling junta that enacts its dreams through force and coercion. So I would say that's the summary position of how I understand the libertarian view of this issue is.
Yeah. It always seemed to me, not that I have a dog in the fight, other than opposing American intervention in the thing all the way around, of course. But it seemed to me like maybe they could have got away with, pre-67 borders for the long term.
But you swallow that in the same way that Texans that came to terms with the fact that they stole part of Mexico. I mean, it's, the history of land struggles are very complicated, and so yeah, the pre-67 borders would have been sustainable. But, I think the problem here is the imperialistic longing. It's like, it's a longing to get rid of possibilities of peace in favor of, endless empire. And, but let me say, Scott, that I'm like temperamentally, and I guess culturally, like extremely sympathetic with Israel. I mean, that's just, I just am. And so at some level, it really breaks my heart to see how pro-Israel sentiment is, channeled into this kind of unrelenting, uncritical apologia, for the ruling regime and all of its works. Even though a lot of, as far as I can tell, a lot of Israel's foreign policy is designed to sort of bamboozle the population and to loyalty to the state, in the same sense that the U.S. foreign policy is. Yeah. The analogies are very close,
Right.
And Israel has a very large and robust peace movement, just like the U.S. does too.
Yeah, it's just
I think that's where our sympathies should lie.
Yeah.
As I say,
so on one state or two, do you have a position on that?
Well, so my abstract idealistic position is no state anywhere, right?
Well, right.
Okay,
so that's an okay answer too. The no state solution, private property rights only for everyone in private courts.
And you know what? I call that my abstract answer. as if that doesn't have any reality. It does have a reality. I mean, private property, private ownership, free enterprise, and commerce is like the magic sauce that makes the world work. It brings peace. It brings people together. Everybody underestimates the power and importance of commerce and ownership. And we see this all around us. You know, I live in Atlanta. There's a beautiful 1 acre or 1 square mile. And this subject for another time, but a private developer came in and bought an old burned out area of Atlanta, right in the core where the Atlanta Steel Mill used to be. That was just crime ridden and dilapidated and disastrous. Bought it, privatized it, invited commerce in there. It's entirely privately owned, private police, private streets, but it's public access too. And I'm telling you, Scott, it's like a utopia. You know, you take an area of land that for, you know, half a century was a disaster, and turn it into a beautiful utopia. And how do you do that? You do that through commerce, private ownership, peace, free enterprise. It's the only thing we've ever found in the history of the world that really helps people achieve and build a beautiful world around themselves, you know? So yep. I think that's the solution in the Middle East, ultimately. You know, more commerce, more migration, more integration of peoples. It's the only way you can get people to get along and to find value in each other, you know? So I don't think that is a utopian suggestion, actually. I think it really does work.
Yeah. All right. Well, hey, man, before we get too utopian here, I think we better go so that this thing isn't too long for people to want to watch later.
Yeah, we got to cut it out. Hey, but you know, it's always amazing to talk to you, Scott.
I think we did good, man. I certainly like asking you questions and hearing you answer them. I'm not so sure about my ranting and raving about Rand, whether that's productive at all. But
no, it's beautiful. You know, every time we do an episode, there's always like 2 or 3 minutes that are like epic, savable, viewable for 10,000 years, and you did it again tonight.
That's what I needed, some demo material. Good. I'm glad I finally got some done somewhere.
You're the best, Scott. I love you.
Right. Hey, thanks, Jeff. Appreciate it, man. You too. And good night, everybody. Thanks for watching.
Okay. Night.
Night.